Welcome to the ANdroscoggion Historical Society. We're working on a few technical difficulties, but I'm sure that'll be taken care of in just a few minutes. Thank you for all showing up on this fine day. We even have programs during the summer now, and events and walking tours. I'm going to turn it over to Annette, and she's going to tell them what we have in store for tonight.
Thank you, David. What a good-looking crowd. How many first-timers? Hold your hand up. Excellent. Excellent. Welcome. And I know a lot of familiar faces I'm seeing in the group, in the well-behaved group. I want to tell you a couple things that are coming, attractions, in case you don't already know. Those of you who are regular attendees and who are members of the society already or have signed up on the sheets that tend to go around at these programs with your name clearly printed and your email address will get notices in your email of the two things that are coming up. May 22nd is our annual dinner meeting, and everybody's invited to that, so you need to sign up. You'll be getting a notice. You'll see it in the newspaper. It's no secret. It's a wonderful evening, and that's only a month away. And before that, we're having our first historic house walking tour, which is Saturday, May 5th at 10 in the morning. And that, I think you have already seen an announcement in the paper for. And if you want more information, ask people who are wearing a badge that shows that they're a board member, because they know a lot. And you're welcome to register for that event. That has a limited participation, so you need to sign up early and put your money down to hold your place, because we will cut off attendees, and maybe we'll do it again, but we're doing part of Main Street with quite a few houses in the National Historic Register, and people have been looking forward to that. So that's coming up on May 5th, and that's before the annual dinner meeting. And we welcome you to participate in any of those. I'm excited about tonight. I guess I say that every program. We have good programs and we have wonderful presenters. I think this just happened to be an appropriate topic. If any of you came over the bridge today and noticed the wonderful water power, I almost stopped, but of course I couldn't because I was driving, and I thought how apropos that our topic tonight is the power of the Androscoggion in the past and the future, and harnessing it and what it's meant to the area. And if anybody doesn't know Jonathan LaBonte, the mayor, and Androscoggion Land Trust expert, and I know you've heard him speak before, I'm sure a lot of you have, and if you don't know him and you don't know his passion for our natural resources in the area, then maybe you came to the wrong class. But we're thrilled to have him here talking tonight, and we welcome him and welcome all of you to our program. Jonathan.
Unfortunately, only one of my city councilors is here, because some of the other 6 that heard me called people should put me back in my place. I'm going to go through it relatively quickly, because it took a good 100 years to develop the power of the river here in Lewiston, Auburn. I'll walk you through some of the timeline, some of the development of the river, give you some sense of how we stacked up against some other industrial New England communities. By far not an exhaustive comparison, but I think it's good for us to look at where we stood then and where we might stand now, and then wrap up with some projections into the future. I like to think that maybe 40, 50, 60, 70 years from now, this organization will still be in place, ideally with reasonable museum space, perhaps improved lecture space, but they'll be looking back at our generation and how we treated the resources and how we positioned the community for the future. So hopefully some of this will start to set the stage for us to imagine big things. There we go. For those of you who don't know who the Androscoggion Land Trust is, and my full-time work, Mayor's part-time, I'm the executive director of the Androscoggion Land Trust, and we do land conservation in the Androscoggion River watershed. The Androscoggion watershed is about 3,600 square miles, and we work within about 500 miles of that, and about 120,000 people live in this section. Most of the river's power on the Androscoggion is from Rumford to Brunswick, so this is pretty much the industrial heart of the Androscoggion where we do our work. We conserve and manage about 4,800 acres of land right now. Over 10 miles of that is frontage along the Androscoggion River. Fairly a significant footprint, and we're very proud of that accomplishment. The Androscoggion River is really unlike any of the other major rivers in the state of Maine. The Kennebec and the Penobscot were early settled predominantly for their opportunity to be a transportation corridor. You look at the history of most of the rivers in New England, even those that were industrialized, like the Merrimack in New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and they started for their ability to transport goods in and out of a region. The Androscoggion River never had that potential, and the fact that it never had that potential really meant it was well positioned to be an industrial river, to be a power river. It drops almost 1,300 feet from the headwaters to the sea, to Merrymeeting Bay, which is significantly a higher drop than the Penobscot or the Kennebec. There are a number of great books that I've come across that outline the history of attempts to actually make the Androscoggion River a transportation river. One of the more fascinating ones was an attempt to build a canal system from above the falls, from Lewiston Falls to Freeport, sort of towing a line through Danville down to Freeport inside of the Royal River. It could never afford it because of the total distance to be traveled, and it really, that and a handful of other opportunities just really never positioned themselves. Some even looked at connecting up to the Kennebec River from Leeds in the Androscoggion Lake. But despite attempts to make this river a transportation river, it really was never feasible. And because of that delay, and this is certainly probably another lecture, and there are others that are far more read than I on Native American history, but that lack of becoming a transportation corridor really buffered the Native American tribes until the industrial settlers began to secure their grants from Massachusetts to start to settle different parts of the region. So if someone was looking to travel and they hit Brunswick Falls, there really wasn't significant potential, they would move up the Kennebec. So the Androscoggion River really was able to function in a very different way, even for the native communities. But of course, the Androscoggion did finally get settled, and there were a number of early settlers in the late 1700s. Among the first three was a gentleman by the name of Captain Harris. Lewiston Falls, Great Falls, has taken on a number of different names. It was originally 20-mile falls, Lisbon being 10-mile falls. That's how it was often referenced in deeds and grants. It took on the name of Harris Falls because Captain Harris actually built the first mill at the head of the falls. The Land Trust, and the last time I was here talking about some of the history of some of our land and its connection to the industrial heritage, we actually conserve his homestead site in what was Lewiston Plantation in Greene. Some very interesting family history there. But he built the first sawmill at the head of the falls, and that's a good look at what it looked like. And of course the name has evolved. Lewiston Falls took on the name later because of the Lewiston grant here, and now Great Falls. And of course if you look at nearly every industrial community, and even communities further west, any place that has a set of rapids or falls, they seem to take on the moniker of Great Falls. I have a bias to Lewiston Falls, but I'm often shot down being on the Arbor side of the river. Maybe that was a compromise. Not exhaustive, but even today, the Androscoggion River is the country's most managed river. We're over capacity right now when you see water coming over the falls, but nearly every drop of water is accounted for year-round. which is an important piece for, in particular, the industry in the upper left, hydropower, which remains, while it's not as visible, probably the last, what will be the last major industry on the Androscoggion River. But as the river was originally built out, there was no electricity. Hydropower, of course, emerged when you actually had the ability to create electricity and then transmit it. Paper mills could operate, and sawmills could operate, textile mills could operate with mechanical power. So simply the dropping of the water in the canal system would allow for turbines to turn and so on. The gentleman on the left, obviously, was a main instigator in what played out ultimately in downtown Lewiston with the build-out here. While he was the face of the operation with the Franklin Company and other groups, there was a suite of investors. Lewiston Auburn's development took on more of the characteristics of the industrial development in other parts of New England, in particular Massachusetts, where it was groups of investors coming together. Further upstream, a lot of the investment that happened in industry was almost single-handedly done by particular investors. So the gentleman on the right, Hugh Chisholm, he developed Jay and Livermore Falls. He'd actually made an attempt to build a canal system there. He laid out plans, but given the topography, his ability to put a canal system in and have sufficient room to build out mill sites just wasn't going to be feasible. He ultimately built his more ideal company town in Rumford, where there was some lay of the land in what they call their island in downtown to divert water away from Rumford Falls and leave a mill site. It's amazing how much planning and technology was available to the industrialists, even in the 1850s, the level of sophistication they needed, not only to create the systems for the water to turn the turbines and make product, but how they laid out their industrial communities, because you couldn't afford to build a canal and say, well, if we had put it 50 feet over, we would have had additional room. You really had to have a good sense of master planning, and as I'll mention Lowell a little bit later, they became models for building industrial towns, and Lowell being the first sort of fully planned out industrial community. This is a look at some great stereo views. If you haven't seen the collection that the city of Lewiston has, they actually have quite a few of these posted on their website. Maine Historic Preservation, and doing some house cleaning probably 7 or 8 years ago, uncovered a nearly full collection of the stereo views from Lewiston Auburn with some great early views. This, of course, is after the upper canal had been built. You can see on the left, that's the view of the upper canal. In the right, that's a view of the Hill Mill, the Continental Mill behind it, and then looking into New Auburn, which actually was New Auburn at the time. Interesting feature, you see at the bottom right here, and I may try to remember a little bit later on, those were the old row houses. When Lewiston was built, most company towns were built, the proprietors would build sufficient workforce housing. I think oftentimes we hear a much more romanticized view with the balloon construction, wood frame tenements that we see in Little Canada today. That type of housing was actually an afterthought. It wasn't part of original design for these communities. A number of mill communities that have been able to hold on to some of their mills and their brick row housing have really positioned that for work-live space in an urban environment. Those brick row houses are spectacular pieces of architecture. Unfortunately, Lewiston tore them down to make room for parking for strip malls, which is always unfortunate.
Excuse me,
yes.
What year was that taken?
Late 1870s, I would venture a guess. I see Doug nodding, so he's in agreement. Well, I'm going to focus predominantly on the Androscoggion River before we sort of move out of state. The Little Androscoggion River was just as important, not only for communities like Norway and South Paris, where you could build smaller mills around agricultural business centers, but in Lewiston Auburn, the potential to use a significant drop on a relatively small river. So this is an image of the construction of the lower Barker Dam and of the Barker Mill to the right. As you talk about some of the movement of land and your ability to lay it out properly,